I'm going to be taking pictures of you.
Yeah, do you think?
Alright,
So
cool.
what are we talking about today anyway?
We're going to talk about you.
That's how the Chili Peppers make all their albums.
What, from jamming?
Yeah, they just get in a room for like a week and then they'll play loads of music in one particular, and then they'll just take little bits and build on that. That's how I write poems a lot of the time. I'll write a stream of consciousness and then just pick one little element from that. That's just, the rest is nonsense, you throw it away. But they call it stripping it for parts. Is this thing on?
Yeah.
Oh, it's on now. We're actually recording now. How did I start? Just by writing, really. It really is just a cathartic exercise that you do because it's what feels right. That's how your brain is processing the world. Just the idea of feeling that language can work in multiple ways, multiple meanings, connotation, symbolism, all these different things appealed to me from a young age before I even knew what any of these terms meant. It didn't have to have logic. I think that's what I like about art, is that a lot of art doesn't need logic, it just needs a moment, and within that moment you're free to do what you want, whereas in school everything a lot of the time is based around logic and reasoning and being right or being wrong. I think it was freedom. There was a lot of freedom involved, and obviously the thing with freedom is when you give it to people who have been taught their whole life to sit down, they don't really know what to do with it. I really think I was much of a performer, and I still don't, to be honest. I see myself as someone who has a message, and that message is almost like a means to an end. You're doing it for yourself, and partly you do it for other people. And I think that's when you get into more plural poetry that concerns us as opposed to the more subjective or the more introspective. I guess that's when it becomes more interesting for me. And I found that I really like writing about issues as opposed to writing about me, if that makes sense. And I guess you could argue that within there is everyone. You know, the human experience is not exclusive to one person. But then at the same time, there's something to be said about the power of rhetoric and political poetry, and poetry that galvanises and talks to power and authority and prejudice and inequality and all these things. And it's important to have a counter narrative. I think that's where I sit with it. But the performance side of things, like I say, you can be very still and maybe a very enticing performer and not say much. You know, I see it like Miles Davis. Miles Davis never played much, but what he did play mattered. And I kind of see it in that way, you know. But I think, yeah, from a scholastic sense, maybe there's an element of scholasticism to what it is that's happening in some of the poems that I've written. But if I'm going to speak plainly here, one of the most frustrating things, particularly with what I've done over the last few years, is that those two poems, If I Told You and Master's Revenge, seem to outweigh the other things that I've done. And I've written a lot of writing, like I've written a lot of poems. Some of them aren't very good, some of them are alright. And most people just talk about those two. So when they talk about education, knowledge, like that, they're just referring to them two. But there's a lot of other poems that don't have those elements. And I've always said I never want to write those two poems again. Not because of the fact that that's what people know you for, is for them to, but also I don't think it's healthy to find a formula, because it creatively stunts you. If you work to a formula, like you see something that works, I don't find that exciting. I find it, you know, it's too easy. You found a key, a pattern that works, just keep repeating it until the day's done. That's not really creativity. That's not really artistry. That's playing it safe. So I prefer to take risks with what I do. There's a school that I've been working at for the last 4 years in Harrow called Whitmore, and in that school there, the first workshop that I did was with a group of kids who were looked at as quite problematic. I worked with them for over 3 years, from year 8 up until they left the school, really, last year. I remember the last week before they're about to leave, one of them came up to me and said to me, Anthony, I've written something. I said, what are you talking about? I haven't taught this guy for about 1.5 years now. And he goes, I've been writing since that year 8 lesson. And he showed me his phone, and he had a whole folder in there where he was putting all his poems, and he was a hyperactive kid, and he came from an unfortunate place, but he was writing a lot, and I think for me that really shows the power of this stuff, and it happens all across the board. I talk to my fellow poets and creative practitioners, and they all say the same thing, even in prison. Once people find it, it's similar to religion in the sense of it that release that it offers, that, I guess, introspection that is required to make sense of your own mind and to make sense of the world that your mind is responding to, is really important. And part of the problem that we have here is that we don't have a room, or we don't have space to accommodate outlets. Where does that go? And I think that with poetry, or with art, the creative arts, it gives it a place to leave. It is very beneficial, even with young kids, making their stories validated, making their experiences important. That is very empowering in a world that's constantly told them that they're stupid, and that their stories and their sentiments and their experiences are unimportant, peripheral, puerile. Those are the kind of things that I think we're trying to tackle. Feels nice to hear a kid who definitely, if it wasn't for you, would never have given two tosses about poetry, and now all of a sudden, not only are they buying poetry books and talking about it with their mates, but they're writing. But too, when they say they want to be a poet, it's like, well, good luck, but at the same time, it's like amazing, keep it up. I was always drawn to melody and lyrics, song lyrics. I remember being very young and listening to my mum's old records, particularly Fleetwood Mac and Simon and Garfunkel, and with Paul Simon anyway, listening to his song. The lyrics, "Hello darkness, my old friend," and I remember being like maybe 8 or 9 and saying, "How can your friend be darkness, Mum?" She said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, he just said, 'Hello darkness, my old friend.' Who's he talking about? Who's the darkness and who's his friend?" She's like, I don't know if she said metaphor, but I don't remember what she said, but she said something I didn't understand, but that was like me thinking, hang on, this doesn't sound like literal language. How come? What does that mean? I was in the bottom set for English. There was 8 sets and I was in set 8. Yeah, I wasn't a very attentive student. I was quite restless. To a library, and then they had poetry section there, and I remember picking up Rumi. They had a Rumi book, and I opened it and I was like, whoa, this is sick. And I just remember thinking at the time, I remember listening to rap music and thinking, this is not similar, but I'm getting a similar kind of sensation. Our poetics, just the way that language can have dual meanings, the way that language can do 3-4 things, the rhythm that you can have. Even on a page, you read out a poem and it has a meter, it has an acoustic quality that I was really interested in. So I started, sonics and soundscapes. So I went to the library and got some Dylan Thomas books out, and I didn't understand the poems. I didn't really know how to access them. And then my mate just said, read them out. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, just read them out to yourself, how they feel in your mouth. And I was like, oh yeah. So I read the poem out, and I was like, this is sick. It felt really similar to rapping along to Eminem or something, like the syllables, the way that he would use language in a very musical way. And I think because of the digital age, things like this, and young people prefer to watch poetry video or watch something on YouTube rather than buy a collection, stuff like that. And a lot of the time the poems that do go viral aren't very sophisticated. I mean, they're not terrible, but they're not amazing pieces of work either. They're very accessible. Well, I mean, we all have social responsibility. It's important to understand that. What I do differentiate between is that I don't think artists have to be socially and morally conscious. I think that they're entitled to choose. So, me personally, I feel I do have a duty. We're many different people and we respond to different stimuli. And I think it's important to accept that if you don't like something, it's probably not for you. I definitely thought that everyone had to, write art that was stimulating and that spoke to power and that challenged authority and was counterculture and anti-establishment. But then that is a form of totalitarianism. That is a form of dictatorship, telling people what they have to do. But then at the same time, no one likes a preacher.